What's going on, guys? Hyper here, and in today's video we'll be talking about the Frost Decay. This video is mainly about what they should do to the Frost Decay, what talents they should remove, maybe what talents they should add, and how should they rework it to play better in general as a class. I mean, in a recent patch there were quite a few Blood Decay changes, which makes me think that Unholy and Frost is being worked on and we will see changes soon. So before those changes will be pushed, I kind of wanted to get my ideas out there and thoughts on how this class could be improved going into the next expansion. First of all, let's talk about baseline abilities. So Empowered Rune Weapon should be replaced, in my opinion, with Hungering Rune Weapon, which is one of our last row talents. And the reason is because Empowered Rune Weapon feels very weak and inefficient to use, and it's also very often very awkward to find a spot where you're low enough on runes to pop Empowered Rune Weapon. And the fact that we get all of our runes back at the same time makes it very inefficient. Because if you think about it, the way Death Knights work, we always have 3 runes recharging. So whenever you pop your Empowered Rune Weapon, it recharges all of your runes. So if you had 3 runes charge up to half and 3 runes completely depleted, then those 3 half runes are basically just disappearing. And especially now that it's back on the global cooldown, it's even harder to find a place for it in the rotation. And I understand that it's supposed to be a resource generation, but the way they design Hungering Rune Weapon, in my opinion, is a much better way to go about it. Even if they remove the haste or just nerf the haste that Hungering Rune Weapon gives, it would be much nicer to get back runes gradually and maybe get some runic power on top of it, instead of just getting back all of our runes at the same time. And that just kind of puts us in a spot where we're overcapping on resources. The second talent which I would like to see made baseline is Inexorable Assault. I will talk about this talent row a little bit later on, but there's quite a few things that they could replace it with, since this is supposed to be a utility row. Now that we took a look at the basic abilities that should be just added to the toolkit of Frost Decays, let's take a look at the talents, because this is where I would like to see the majority of changes. First of all, remove Horn of Winter. With the addition of new raid buffs back, so classes like warriors and priests and mages are getting their raid buffs back, it would be nice to see Horn of Winter being returned to that previous state where it is just used as a raid buff. So this also would mean that it should be baseline. And what could we put instead of it in this talent? Well, if we look at the talent, we have a flat damage increase on our Howling Blast, and then an RNG rune regeneration, which is completely fine by me. So what this talent is missing, or what this row is missing rather, is a talent that synergizes with Breath of Sindragosa. So you could make an argument that the rune regen does synergize, because if we get runes back, then we're able to spend more runes, gain more runic power. But the way we convert runes to runic power usually is not all that efficient. So what I would like to see it being added here is the tier 20, or the Nighthold, I'm pretty sure that was 20, set bonus, which whenever we Howling Blast, we get runic power. Because if you played with Breath of Sindragosa, you very often run into a situation where you need to make the choice. Am I going to use up this Rhyme proc, or am I going to press Obliterate and risk overriding my Rhyme proc because I'm low on runic power? So if we had a talent that gives us runic power whenever we Howling Blast, then that would synergize greatly with Breath of Sindragosa. And since they reshuffled all of those talents in one of the patches in Legion, we kind of lost a lot of synergy to Breath of Sindragosa, and it only saw uses in very niche situations. The second talent I would like to see removed is Glacial Advance. Now, this button, or this talent, just kind of clutters up our toolkit. Even if it was good enough to use as a talent in AoE situations, we already have Frostbite. And Frostbite is such a great ability that putting Glacial Advance in there, even if it did a lot of damage, it would just like clutter up our toolkit. And for AoE, we would just press it on cooldown, and then outside of that, we would just Frostbite. But why have 2 abilities that essentially do the same, but one of them just does more damage and is on a longer cooldown? It doesn't really make sense to me from a design perspective. So for a possible replacement for this talent, I was thinking an Empowered Pillar of Frost. So this row is revolved around Pillar, right? We have Ice Cap, which removes the cooldown of our Pillar so we can use it more often. And then we have Avalanche, which gives our pillar kind of a burst damage. With an empowered pillar, so as you know, we're losing our bracers, legendaries going into BFA. So I would like to see that passive come back into an empowered pillar where we would get like 15 or 20% increased frost damage. So this would not affect our obliterates, but again, it would give us great synergy with Breath of Sindragosa, and maybe even great synergy with some AoE abilities that we would use. And then in the CC row, I would like to see Abomination's Might removed from the game. So with our stun being removed from Winter is Coming, we don't really have a reliable stun. And Abomination's Might is supposed to be that, you know, sometimes you get a stun, sometimes you don't, but it is just RNG. And this also makes it really bad in PvP, because in PvP, it is all about control. So DR, which is just diminishing returns, whenever you stun someone, the next stun for X amount of seconds will have half the duration. And then if you stun again, it will have a quarter. And if you stun again, it will have an eighth of the duration. So if you're just randomly proccing Abomination's Mights, then you're just DRing your own stuns or your teammate's stuns. So this is a very bad designed ability from a PvP perspective. And also in PvE, it won't see much use because we have Blinding Sleet. That will be the control ability. Players like having control over RNG, and this has been proven over abilities that we saw that are similar to Abomination's Might, which just don't see use because players prefer, even if they take a shorter stun perhaps, if they have control over it of when they're going to use it, then they will opt into that. So to that end, I suggest replacing it with Asphyxiate. Blood and Unholy already has this ability, so even if it's shorter, if we just had a button where we can control, okay, now I want to have a 3-second stun, and then you have control over it, you see the cooldown of it, you can predict when you're going to press the ability. Because the RNG of Abomination's Might is just not good to play around. So earlier I mentioned that Inexorable Assault should be removed as a talent and added as a baseline toolkit for Frost DKs. And I suggest replacing it with Mirror Ball. So if you don't know what Mirror Ball is, it is the artifact talent or artifact ability from Legion, where whenever you pressed AMS, it removed all of the dots that were already applied to us. And this just became such a core ability to Frost DK in raiding, in PvP, in Mythic Dungeons, basically everywhere, that DKs learned to play around it, and it was an amazing ability to use. And this choice is supposed to give us, or this talent row rather, is supposed to give us choices between defensive talents that compensate for lack of mobility, so we can maybe take an extra hit instead of having to run out. And Inexorable Assault doesn't really make sense because it is a damage increasing talent. So I understand that they're trying to make us make a choice between having extra defensives or doing more damage. But if you're taking extra defensives, you will have perfect uptime on the boss. And if you take Inexorable Assault, maybe you'll have to run out, but then you get the stacks, which make you do more damage. But overall, I think just having a pure utility defensive row is much better. Also, Mirror Ball became really core in PvP against some classes. So classes like Affliction Warlocks, a Shadow Priest, Fire Mages, you know, classes with dots, they hit very hard. Mirror Ball became just a core ability to help Frost DKs deal with those classes. And I would really like to see its return because it saw a lot of great use throughout the raids in Legion. And then in the next row, a lot of people are trying to make the argument to remove Frozen Pulse and add the different talents. I'm kind of indifferent on this, but I would like to see it buffed and scaled properly, because I think this talent should be a middle ground between Frostsight and Gathering Storm, where Frostsight should be that talent that we take on pure AoE, where we are always cleaving and have good uptime on our Frostsight. And the Gathering Storm should give us kind of a more single target benefit, where we can ramp up those big Remorseless Winters and do a lot of damage. And then Frozen Pulse should maybe be a hybrid between the two, where we have the option to take this talent on a fight where we have some AoE and some single target, and then because it will pull ahead of Gathering Storm on AoE, but then it's going to fall behind it on single target. And then same for Frostbite, it will be behind it on AoE, but ahead of it in single target. So this should be kind of a middle ground between the two talents. And then for the last row, I mentioned that I would like Hungering Rune Weapon to replace Empowered Rune Weapon and become a baseline ability, so that again frees up a talent slot. So in raids, most likely Obliteration or Breath of Sindragosa will be the go-to, depending on how they're scaled and how they're kind of work and synergize together, and it also depends a lot on the style of the boss fights. But with Mythic Plus becoming very important to the game and Sephuz being removed, I feel like this is the perfect opportunity to add it in as a talent. This talent would have, of course, the same effect as Sephuz. They could change it around to be more of a Frost Decay themed talent. So instead of just giving us haste, maybe whenever we interrupt or whenever we CC, it gives us extra frost damage, or, you know, a hybrid of the two, maybe some haste and then some frost damage. But it would be really nice to have a talent that we kind of rely on in Mythic Plus. Because I'll be honest, Obliteration doesn't feel all that great to use on AoE situations. Because you pop Obliteration and the idea is that you would weave Frostbite with Howling Blast. But then when you're not getting Howling Blast procs, having to press Frost Strike on a huge AoE pack kind of feels bad to use. So for this reason, I feel like a talent which would kind of be AoE or Mythic Plus exclusive, or those are the situations where we would take it more often, would be really nice to see added to the game. And last but not least, we have Sindragosa's Fury. Like I mentioned before, this is an amazing ability both visually and feels awesome to use, so very rewarding ability to use. And what is your opinion on this? How does it fit into the BFA Frost Decay toolkit? Should it be a talent? Should it be baseline? Should they change anything about it? I will leave this up to you guys. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.